Good morning, everyone. Namaste. So, we have an interesting topic this morning, and it's in relation to the mind and our relationship with our mind. Just when I use that term, our relationship with our mind, it's not normally how we think or how people think about the mind. We have a tendency to just kind of operate in life and we accept certain things as being very true and relevant. It's almost like I can remember one time when I was younger and I had small kids, and one of the children is asking me to buy something, and of course I opt for the convenient dad excuse, I don't have any money, so we can't buy it, and thinking that's going to put an end to it. And of course the child goes, well, why don't you just go to the bank? And it's like, that's very obvious for a kid because they associate money with a bank, and they might have been with their parents at one time, and if you need money, you just go to the bank and get it. The idea that you can't take money from a bank if you don't have money there is sort of like, that's not even part of the equation. If you need money, you just go to the bank and get it. And we often in life approach life in a similar sort of way. We have sort of like conceptions or ideas that everybody holds, and we don't really often step back and try to think about things and try to consider what is the reality of things. In the yogic understanding, they speak about the fact that number one, you the person, are not the body that you have on. This is actually not you. It doesn't really have anything much to do with you apart from the fact that you're using it. And there will come a point in this life when you have to leave it. And you will leave it behind, and that's it. It's done. It's finished. And your connection, your relationship with that body is over. We often don't even think very clearly about this event of death and what it means. But this reality does exist, that I am not the physical body that I am occupying. And in a similar way, I am also not my mind. We usually don't think of it this way, but the mind is something that we should use and not be used by. All too often in this world, we simply learn to respond to different kinds of stimulus. We see something that we like, or we experience something that we say we like or we dislike, and then we have either an attraction or a repulsion from it. And we just continuously go on day after day through this endless stream of coming into contact with things or desiring things that we think we like and are desirable, and trying to avoid other types of things. And in that journey, we often don't think very clearly about happiness and what it is that's really going to bring us to the platform of happiness. We all seek happiness, don't we? We all seek it. That's what really motivates us and drives us. But if we look around in my own life and looking at the lives of other people, how many people have attained this desirable state of actual happiness? Do you know anyone that has attained this condition? We're quite happy. Yeah, I'm not putting down the fact that people can be quite happy and cheerful in life. But if we really try to look at it quite analytically, and can I just put it this way? We have a desire and a capacity for infinite happiness. That's actually our desire. Our desire is to be in a, I mean, why do all the fairy stories end with, and they lived happily ever after? That's not just by coincidence. That became a part of our folk history, not just in the English-speaking world, in almost all countries, in almost all societies, this idea of living happily ever after. So we have to ask ourselves, is the happiness that I'm experiencing now that condition? Is this the happily ever after, or is it not? And if it is not, does such a state exist? And can I actually attain that? Can I actually participate in that? Can I live in that state? In brief, the answer is, of course, yes. But a big part of whether we are going to be incredibly successful in our search for real perfect happiness is going to be determined by how we see the world, how we look at others, and how we look at ourselves. If we consider this idea of the self, myself, wanting to be happy, if I limit myself to the idea that this body that I have on is me, this is the big picture, then I will spend almost my entire life trying to feed this body, feed it experiences, whether it's food or music or things that you see or things that you hear, things that you touch, all types of sensory experience. But at the same time, I'm sort of like experiencing that the things that should provide me happiness can at one time make me happy and at another time make me very uncomfortable or very unhappy. And a good example we give often is, like, you think, what's your favorite food? Just whatever it is, just think what your favorite food is. Okay, if we lock you in a room and feed you nothing but that food for the next 3 weeks, how is that going to go for you? It's not going to take very long before you get really upset and in fact angry about having to eat your favorite food. The thing that when you thought about initially, oh, if I could just do that, I just love that, that's just like wonderful. And so it is whether it's a piece of music that really sends me into rapture, and put the headphones on, tie you to a chair, let's play that music continuously for 24 hours. How is that one? What sort of rapture are you going to be in now? No, this has become like a form of torture. And it's sort of like, okay, well, why is that happening? Why is that happening? Why is it like that? How come we've come up with this kind of cliche term, variety is the spice of life? It's largely because of this reality. If I don't constantly mix it up, if I don't constantly change what I'm doing to my body and my mind, then I will soon fall into a state of unhappiness. The mind plays a really pivotal role in our life. What's the common thing that we do if we're looking to make ourselves happy or to be happy? We're almost always looking beyond ourselves. We're scanning the horizon and thinking about things outside of ourselves and looking to try and get hold of something or someone or an experience and pull it in close to me and think if I'm cuddled up with this experience, everything is going to be wonderful. In the yoga process, one of the things that we learn is that the journey of life, the journey towards happiness, the journey towards fulfillment is actually not an outward-looking journey. It's a journey that goes within our own hearts. By nature, being a spiritual being, my nature is to exist in a state of complete happiness. But being stuck in this body and in this world, I have lost that understanding and am now just like all over the place looking for things that I can pull in close to enrich my life. The mind, let me just read you something very quickly. Is this okay? There's a little bit of a problem in talking about these things. They can get a little bit, I'm going to use the word technical. The other thing is that it's not how we're accustomed to thinking. Just like the little kid, my child telling me if I need money, I just go to the bank and get it, because they don't know any reality apart from their little world and the way that they're seeing things. In a very similar manner, we have a way of looking at things. We have a way of trying to understand things. And it may not be very true, and it definitely may not be very, very profound. So, there's a very famous yoga text or Vedic text. It is called the Bhagavad-gita. Have you heard this before? The Bhagavad-gita, literally translated, it means like the song of God. And it is an amazing narrative. It takes place on a battlefield, and there is a discussion with a warrior prince about life and about life's purpose and where to find perfection and where to find happiness. And in that conversation, there is a verse that states, "For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy." And I think that's the title of the talk today I was asked to speak on, is about that. So what does that mean? What does that mean, that the mind can either be a great friend or a great enemy? You know, there are so many ways in which we can look at this and we can try to understand this. For somebody that suffers from depression, and I think almost everybody at some point in their life to some degree will have this experience. Or if a person is overwhelmed by anger to the point where they're becoming violent, a person who is, they say green with envy, where you're just like looking at what everybody else has and feeling so envious about that. I had a very close friend, a brother-in-law. He suffered not from envy in the way people normally think, but this idea that everybody else's life is so perfect and wonderful and mine is completely crap. And of course, the end of that road meant he took a gun and shot himself. He shot his body, killed himself, because of this feeling of, being so happiness and fulfillment being so elusive. We see people struggling with concepts of body image and whether I am acceptable, whether I am lovable, whether, these types of things. People think about this kind of thing. I can give you limitless examples of how, when a person takes this type of thought or thinking and they immerse themselves in it, it becomes incredibly destructive. It always ends in great unhappiness. But there are also other ways in which the mind distracts or misleads or can be considered from a spiritual perspective to be an enemy. I'm not going to talk in detail on any of this stuff. I'm just going over it very, very quickly. Your life in this body had a beginning and it will have an end. And then what happens? Where does it go? The Vedic understanding is that of what's often termed as reincarnation, but is more accurate to talk about the transmigration of the soul. You move on. You occupy another body. You have another start. You live another life, completely caught up in whatever body you had. Now you may have a woman's body or a man's body, and you identify with that. That's me. That's who I am. But when I move on and acquire another body, I get completely engrossed in that as well. And when a person has a body, there are certain things that are inescapable. One is the aging process. How's that one working out? Are we having fun with that one or what? For a person that's really relating to the world through the body, like the body is me, the aging process is almost like death. It is a monster that you must now battle with. Once you pass youthfulness, you now must constantly battle with and try to make it do something that it's not going to do. It's heading in a certain direction and it is unstoppable. So the aging process will be there, and it doesn't matter how well you choose to live. Disease of different types are also inescapable. For a few people that experience brilliant health all through their life, and then at the end they die of old age. They don't really have anything, no disease going on, but they die of old age. These people are very rare. It does happen, but for the most people they will encounter the discomfort of some form of ailment or other. And then of course finally the place where it's all heading is death, and nobody thinks that that's a brilliant experience that they're all looking forward to. In fact, we don't want to talk about that one, we don't want to think about it, but that's the reality. And in between, your life is going to be a series of ups and downs, of feeling some happiness and quite often unpleasantness and difficulty. what role does the mind play in this journey? In Sanskrit, this is called samsara. It means the cycle of birth and death that just goes on continuously, Well, the mind plays a really pivotal role. When we become very controlled by our mind and the desires that are manifesting in our mind, then we will continuously have to act in this world. We will be forced to act, to achieve something, to do something, to try something, we will act. And based on the laws of karma, and this word karma means action, based on the laws of karma, for every action that you perform, there will be a reaction. And so as long as you're engaging in material activity, there will be stuff that you will have to experience as a consequence. When a person is born in this lifetime, you notice that everybody's not born in the same situation, in the same economic status, in the same condition of physical health, in the same sense of beauty or plainness, or all these things that come with a birth. You notice everybody's different. Everybody gets a different hand. They get a different hand they're dealt a different hand to deal with. That is the product of how we have lived previously. And so the mind, when it stimulates us to act in the search for happiness, in the search for a home, in the search for fulfillment, when it stimulates me like this and I act and search in this way and that way, all it does is tie me to this situation, this ongoing cycle of birth and death that I just don't become free of. If by good fortune, by design, by desire, whatever, I decide, I begin to ask the questions, what really is this all about? What is my life actually for? Do I have any real purpose? Why do I have this desire for great happiness? Why do I have this desire for love? To both love and to be loved. Why is this all occurring? And how do I really find answers to this? When we begin in any way, shape, or form to think about some of these things, or to question this, even though it may not be that clear to us, within our heart we may have some aching, some desire, for something more, then this really begins the process of spiritual awakening, where we begin to really look for answers and things. The mind is understood in, it's really different. The yogic understanding, the spiritual understanding of the mind, and modern psychiatry, for instance. The big difference is this: your mind is not simply part of who you are. It is something that is covering you. The understanding is that the spiritual being is first covered by a very subtle body, and this subtle body is largely made of the mind. And then you have the gross physical body. Now, if we live a life of always following our mind and the desires within the mind, then most people will find that their life is not very satisfactory. Of course, we all know the Rolling Stones, right? No? Yes? And their famous song, yeah, I can't get no satisfaction. We're talking about a group of young people in their prime of life, in that body, and an era of unrestrained sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Constant, 24 hours, right? 24/7 party. That was their life. Doing everything in excess. And yet, they end up writing a song, I can't get no satisfaction. And I tried, and I tried, and I tried. Now there's a wonderful, wonderful truth to that. But if we choose this path of simply just going along with everything and never attempting to step back and exercise any control of our mind on many levels, it will simply cause us unhappiness. Anger. Is anger a wonderful experience or a not wonderful experience? I think for most people it's a very terrible thing. And I think everybody to different degrees have experienced anger, either themselves or in relation to someone else. I can remember my first exposure to out-of-control anger. I grew up, I was born in Hamilton, and my mum was a hairdresser. My dad suffered from radiation sickness, where he was in the occupation forces in Japan. Became very ill after returning bulldozing rubble at Hiroshima. And all his hair fell out and he got really sick and nobody knew what was wrong with him. It took many years to figure out what it was all about. And while he was sick, he was having difficulty, working. And so my mum, she was a hairdresser by training, and so she would do things in the house and she'd go to people's house and hairdress. And there was some woman that was getting married and she was doing her hair the day before the wedding, and she had a couple of friends with her, bridesmaids, and they were getting their hair done. And I can remember I was sitting under the table as a little kid, I was really small, and playing with some toys or whatever. And then this other lady, one of the other ladies that was meant to be a bridesmaid but wasn't, stormed in and started this argument. And this argument suddenly escalated. And I can remember how scared I was as a kid. It was like, wow, this is getting really scary, where people are now screaming at each other, and now physical contact, and you've got people pulling each other's hair. And I'm kind of like wondering if I'm safe here, And suddenly they fall down on the ground and they're rolling around screaming and pulling each other's hair and cursing and everything. And I move out to the corner. I'm just like, oh. The anger wasn't even directed at me, but to see how things came unglued so quickly was actually quite terrifying. And for those of us who may have been the recipient of great anger as children, and particularly as women, and as people in a position in life where they may be perceived to be the weaker of the party, when they become a recipient of great anger, it's a very fearful and horrible experience. But what we don't often see is the person that is becoming overwhelmed by anger. is also deeply suffering. They are not victorious in expressing their anger. They are becoming also victims of their own mind and their own surrendering to anger. Their hearts become so disturbed from this expression of anger, particularly when it's physically or verbally very, very violent. They have become so, they've lost the plot. They are so covered. It's impossible in a state of anger to have a spiritual thought. It's impossible in that condition to have any appreciation of how I am a glorious spiritual being temporarily residing within this body. I have become so covered and so lost, and I am so much caught up in this turbulence of my mind. It's like a person in a small boat out in the middle of an ocean, and it's become such a storm. Everything is just dark. It's covered with dark clouds. There is lightning, violent winds, big waves, and you've been tossed around, probably thrown out of the boat and hanging on to the side, and just lost and wondering, does this ever end? That's what it's like for a person who is experiencing themselves what it is to be overcome or overwhelmed by anger. We can look at so many different types of emotions and things that come to us and analyze and look at it in the same sort of way. What is really important for you and for me, if we want to live a life where we can actually become peaceful, where we can move towards a state of not just, a few butterflies and unicorns, but, a state of constant and real happiness. One of the things that's really important is to actually learn how to exercise control over your mind. Your mind is yours. It is yours to use or to be used by. If we learn how to exercise control of our emotions, and I'm not just talking about the negative ones, even the ones that draw us. I mean, how many times do we get into situations where, I'm just so sold that this particular person, for instance, is going to be my soulmate. It's everything I've wanted and looked for. This is going to be so perfect. And then we go down the path of, committed to this relationship. We go down this path, and then everything starts coming unraveled. And then fights start, and we develop these habits of how we act and how we react. And all of this is very much driven by the mind and the fact that we are not exercising any control over it. Whatever erupts, whatever happens, we're there. We're totally there. We're totally going with it. And we're so unintelligent in those moments that many of the ways in which we react to things, whether we are the aggressor or somebody is transgressing against us, the way in which we react and we do things almost never makes things better, and almost always makes things worse. Do you think that's true or not? Like, you find these situations when somebody points out a fault. Oh, why did you do that? That's so stupid. And the answer is not, okay, well, I didn't think about it like that. I'm glad you pointed that out. Sorry about that. We'll look at another way of doing it. You know, it's so stupid. Hey, what about you? Isn't that the response? What about you? And then we immediately start dredging up things from the past and throwing them in the person's place because I feel my ego has somehow been bruised or hurt by their statements. The fact that I did something that was not correct or whatever is sort of like irrelevant. But the fact that I feel bruised and I'm hurt and now it's my turn to retaliate and fight back. You know, isn't this actually what's, you know, we go from these periods of sort of like everything seems to be on an even keel. And all that's going on is that we're not just reacting to things and nobody's sort of like picking a fight. But then as soon as something happens, all this stuff that's actually there under the surface now bubbles to the top. So this is actually quite a big subject and getting into the detail of this. So we're just kind of like looking at it in a broad sort of way. The best thing that you can ever do for yourself in a moment of passion, in a moment of emotions, anger, greed, you know, anything like this, envy of others, whatever, lust, anything, is to learn how to hit the pause button, how to take a break, a time out. Don't react immediately. I'm not going there right now. Let's talk about this in 5 minutes or 10 minutes when I've got my head on straight. Because right now I am just reacting inside. I'm not doing anything outside, but inside a volcano has already erupted. And I'm ready to hit back. I'm ready to swing out. I'm ready to do all this stuff. By consciously making the effort to not just follow and go with your mind when it is going somewhere, to step back and walk away, to take a few deep breaths. You know, here they're teaching different processes of meditation, processes that are really simple. Anybody can do them. Most people's idea of meditation is like, it's probably really good, but do I really have to do it? It's you know, it's like something that's quite difficult or strenuous or require. No, the process of meditation should be very sweet and it should be very enjoyable. It should be very practical. And so they give you some of those tools here. But these tools, what they do is make it so that when we step away from things, that we can now begin to take a little bit of a mental time out and to engage in some spiritual and purifying activity that calms the mind down and makes it so that we are now in the driver's seat. My mind is not in the driver's seat. My mind, which is going on a rampage and can easily drag me with it, I learn to step back and now to exercise this control. And then I can start utilizing my mind to think, is it in my best interest to react this way? You know, when we have a reaction to something, it's because we want things to be different. I want this attack, if somebody has verbally assaulted me or said something to hurt me or done something to me, I want this to go away. I want to assuage the bruised heart. I want to do these different things. I want to return to where I was before this person started this or before this thought erupted in my head. I want to get back to that place. But then my reaction, is my reaction going to get me to that place? Is my reaction really going to make things better? You know, 99.99% of the time, our reaction doesn't make things better, it makes things worse. It doesn't move us towards what we see as a desirable goal. It actually takes us away. And we are so accustomed to just following our mind that we won't even take the time to analyze and think, was that a good thing to do? Was that a good way to react? Did I get myself into a better situation as a result of what I just did? We don't think in these terms. But learning how to do that by making conscious choices about how I am going to live, how I am going to process things, how I'm going to direct my life going forward, is really an important part of spiritual awakening. By engaging in this type of activity and this type of thoughtfulness and carefulness, it becomes easier if I adopt a regular practice of meditation. A regular practice of meditation, what it does, it gives me, it's like you go to the gym and you work out so that you get muscles. You get stronger body. If you just lie on the bed and watch an exercise video every day, that doesn't help, right? You need to do something about it. So in a similar way, you need to develop these spiritual muscles to make it so that you have more control over your life, that you are more in the driver's seat in terms of making decisions and how you are going to direct things. This is a very foundational part of the yoga experience. Yoga is about coming into a state of actual harmony. Not so much the way people think about it in relation to my body being in harmony with this world and, everything's cool and groovy. No. It has to do with a spiritual awakening and then a harmony within myself, where instead of being the victim who has been dragged around by my mind and my emotions, where I am trapped in ideas that are not true, that are not real, like the idea that I am this body, that I will find happiness by simply stimulating my body always and feeding my body different types of experiences. No, that won't result in happiness. It results in some titillation, and if you can keep it up, you can be quite titillated for quite a while. But as soon as you stop, you will find yourself in that same place again, that same place of not being totally fulfilled. So the process of yoga and the process of meditation is to bring real harmony to your life. And that harmony means this spiritual understanding of who I am, that I'm a spiritual being. This body I have on is temporary. This mind is something I should be using and not just being dragged around by. And then engaging in activity that reinforces that appreciation and builds a real change of vision to the point where I begin to see this world differently. I see others differently. I see myself differently. I see it from a real spiritual perspective and a spiritual foundation. Was that worth the time coming in? Yeah? I certainly hope so. Does anybody have any questions? I'll just add, really that we're just sort of like scratching the surface still here. These subjects are actually wonderful, and they can be explored in tremendous depth with greater and deeper appreciation. So we're just more or less scratching the surface. But what I'm trying to do is try to give you some practical understanding for your life that will make your life actually better. So, anybody have any question or anything they'd like to raise? Feel free. Yes.
So, what then is the relationship between mind and emotion? You sort of talked about how you feel in these different ways, and then the mind, are they both the same thing, or?
The mind, the mind serves a number of functions. All of the senses are attached to the mind. So everything that you experience with your body is deposited within the mind. The mind is also a huge memory bank of all the experiences that you've ever had are there. They may not be at the forefront, but they are also there. The emotions, I mean, let's just talk about, and we're talking about emotions here from a material perspective. In this life, the average person is completely absorbed in the idea that the body is me, and that I can find happiness and fulfillment, I can find a home and everything by doing things connected to this body. And then when I do things that cause some titillation, some tickling, and then my mind is overwhelmed with what I think to be positive emotions. I'm all happy and bubbly and everything. But if things happen that cause pain to my body, or pain in connection with a relationship. I mean, in relationships, I have expectations. I want someone to fulfill my need for love. I want to both love and to be loved, and I'm looking for the perfect person who will satisfy those needs. And then I want to lay claim to that person so nobody else can have them. And if that person goes off in another direction, if that person doesn't respond as they initially did in this relationship, or they say things because they're becoming dissatisfied that cause me hurt and pain, this eruption of emotion, negative emotion, then occurs within the mind. For a person that has come to a platform of real spiritual understanding, it's not that they are not going to experience some of those things, but they are not moved by them. And the example is given in the Bhagavad-gita again, just as, I think the Wanganui, is it? There's the biggest river here in New Zealand. We don't really have massive rivers, like rivers that are 5 kilometers or 100 kilometers across the mouth. When you see them rushing into the ocean, it's just like so much water, it's unbelievable. But they give the example that just as the ocean remains steady in spite of so many rivers rushing into it, in a similar manner, a person that has come to a platform of real spiritual understanding, there may be a constant influx from their senses and even from their mind of what should be disturbances. But even in that state, the person is able to remain calm and unmoved by it. So what it essentially means is learning that you don't have to go with your mind. Your mind can get into a tizzy about something and be all upset and all these doubts or confusions or anger, all these things going on. You don't have to follow it. You don't have to go with it. You can put it in the corner like a naughty child, right? And try to give it something to occupy it, and eventually it's going to calm down. When it calms down, okay, now you're allowed back in the room. It literally becomes like this for a person that is developing spiritually, where they, are not moved by those things. But for the mind to become a great friend, a person on a spiritual path now takes their mind and seeks to fill it with spiritual images, spiritual experience, spiritual thought, even in terms of how they're looking at others, how they're looking at their life. And this then makes it so that the mind takes on an amazing characteristic. If I take a rod of iron, and we know iron is cold, it is very hard. If I put it in a very hot fire and fan that fire, that iron gradually becomes red hot and then white hot. And when I pull it out of the fire, it is still iron, but now it has all the characteristics of fire. It's emitting light, it's emitting heat. If I touch it to something that's flammable, it will burst into flames. It's now iron, but it's taken on all the characteristic of fire. In a similar way, by immersing the mind in that which is spiritual thought, spiritual experience, spiritual association, spiritual sound, then the mind becomes increasingly purified and takes or adopts more like a spiritual nature. But during that process, a person may still be, the mind may be disturbed by different things and different types of emotion, but we learn to not pay much attention to it. Is that? Yeah. It's actually, there's heaps more to it. It's quite, maybe we'll do some classes sometime on the Yoga Sutra, because it really gets into it in some detail. Okay, anything else? Yes.
I quite agree with you. In the beginning you mentioned people are looking for happiness, and then people have their own definition of happiness.
Yeah.
But if we scrutinize those happiness, you will find they are quite short.
Yeah.
A short period of time, and I assume that when you mentioned the happiness, as you said, there was a word, you said indefinite. It means that happiness can last longer.
Yeah.
And could you elaborate a little? Because for most of us, I think most of us have experienced short-term happiness.
Yeah.
The grandparents see the grandchildren, at one moment they are lovely, so cute, and then the second moment turn to be a monster. So I think most of us has experienced a short-term happiness, more or less. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people experience the one that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So
It is. Yeah. It is. It is not a. It is not a common thing. Did everybody hear or? Okay. So that is the nature of the so-called happiness that one experiences in this world. It has a beginning and it definitely has an end. How long is that period? It can. A little bit like this, but then we've got to go on to something else and hopefully build a whole chain that lasts forever. But that's not really a possibility. So part of our spiritual nature, the reason that you have a desire for happiness is because it is part of our eternal spiritual nature to exist in a state of profound joyfulness and happiness. The desire that you have for love also comes from your deep spiritual nature. But when I seek to try and fulfill that just in this world and worldly experience, it never, fills me as I hope it will. This happiness that is spiritual in nature, in order to experience it means we have to completely uncover our spiritual identity. We have become so covered up by ideas that this body is me. Like if I ask people to identify themselves, who are you? Well, they usually go, I'm a man or I'm a woman, I'm this age, I'm this height, I've got this weight, I'm of this ethnic extraction, my complexion is like this, All I'm doing is just listing this whole list related to my body. But at the time of death, when a person leaves and we say that the person has left, they've gone, what is left behind is the thing I was describing with all those labels. So we have become very deeply covered up. Our real spiritual identity is hidden. It is like it has been covered. And we are so busy in this world and just reacting to things and following our mind, and there's all this stuff going on. We don't take the time. And what we need to do, it's like unpacking a gift. You receive a gift, and first you've got to open the ribbon, and then you've got to, take off some of the tape and begin to open it up, and then there's a box, and you've got to open that up and find out what's inside. This spiritual process is like that. It is a process by which gradually these things that are covering us, that we are relating to and thinking is us, we learn that this is not us. And our true spiritual identity begins to manifest, we begin to experience. There are different types of spiritual happiness, and those different types all of them are within the category of spiritual happiness. But they describe them, spiritual happiness, as being perfect, more perfect, and most perfect, meaning that there are still degrees of spiritual experience. The happiness that you will feel earlier when one of the girls was singing and they were chanting this spiritual mantra, Haribol Nitai Gaur, these spiritual sounds, it's not like ordinary material sound vibration. If I want to become clean, say my body, or if my clothing is dirty, if I take my clothing and I just put it in the washing machine, but I don't turn on the water, and I don't put any soap, and I just press the button and it just starts turning around inside, it never becomes clean. You need water and you need the soap to get the dirt out of the cloth, right? So when we take something which is spiritual, this spiritual sound, and we immerse ourselves in it, it has the effect of gradually awakening our actual inner happiness. And this inner happiness is described as being so wonderful that when a person can taste even one drop of it, this world loses all of its attraction. The things that we used to think were so wonderful and everything, we now see with more clarity that they're just brief experiences that we go through. And as we progress spiritually and this understanding awakens and this experience awakens of our real spiritual identity, then one becomes increasingly immersed in this transcendental experience that is so joyful. It's described as being like a form of spiritual ecstasy. It is cannot compare it to anything in this world. It's kind of like if I go to, I spent 35 years in the Philippines, and sometimes we'd go and do things, and you'd go to some of the interior areas, and there were like mountain tribes, and there were people up there that they would, they were the foragers, and at nighttime to sleep they would just cut a banana leaf and put it down on the ground, and cut another banana leaf and lie like this. If the area was more dangerous, they would climb a tree and hug a tree sitting on a branch, and they would just sleep there. I mean, their life was so simple and basic. And if I tell them, you should try ice cream. Ice cream? What's ice cream? Well, there's this thing called a cow, and it's got milk. Well, I can sort of figure out milk because the babies have milk from their mother. But what's this cow? No idea. What sugar? They've never tasted sugar. They have no idea what this, for them, sweetness is to get like a, what do you call it here? Sweet potato, kumara, you know, and that for them is sweet, right? So the sugar is like shocking. But then this idea, this process that you can make something so cold that water can set hard, that's just like, what? That's impossible for them to even conceive. And then to have this process where you can make milk so cold and mixed with sugar and flavors, and make it so cold that it forms this creamy, cold they just can't even understand what you're talking about because it is beyond experience. So I'm using that example not as a way to escape your question. I'm not trying to escape or wanting to escape. But this is the reality. Until we actually have that experience of tasting this happiness, we can only sort of like try to liken it to something that we have already experienced in this world. But nothing here really prepares us for what that spiritual experience is. Okay? Okay, so I think we'll end there. And in ending, I'll just, again, we'll chant a little of this transcendental sound. We've got this one up here, Om, Hari Om. And you can either just sit and close your eyes and take the sound in, or if you feel inclined and would like to, then please join in with us and respond also. And just relax your mind and absorb it, just listening to the sound and taking it into your heart.